For decades, Tom Silva has been one of the most trusted faces in American home improvement television. Calm, methodical, and unfailingly grounded, he became synonymous with craftsmanship done the right way. To millions of viewers, he wasn't just a contractor explaining joists or load-bearing walls. He was reassurance itself. The man who showed up every week, solved complex problems with quiet confidence, and never talked down to his audience. That is precisely why, when whispers began circulating about his future, fans listened closely. The rumors didn't explode overnight. They crept in slowly, almost politely. Viewers noticed Tom appearing a little less, speaking a little more carefully about time, legacy, and teaching the next generation. Online forums buzzed with speculation. Was he stepping back? Had age finally caught up with him? Or was something deeper happening behind the scenes of this old house? A show built on trust, precision, and decades of credibility? To understand why these questions carried so much weight, you have to understand who Tom Silva really is. Long before cameras, scripts, or national recognition, Tom was shaped by the working-class rhythms of Lexington, Massachusetts. His world was defined by early mornings, job sites, and the steady lessons of a father who believed that building wasn't just about structures, it was about responsibility. From a young age, Tom learned that every measurement mattered, even the ones no one would ever see. Especially those. Those early lessons didn't just teach him how to build, they taught him how to think. Why reinforce a beam? Why choose one joint over another? Why refuse shortcuts when no one is watching? For Tom, the answers were never about ego or perfectionism. They were about respect for the craft, for the homeowner, and for the people who would live with the results long after the tools were packed away. That mindset followed him into adulthood and into the founding of Silva Brothers Construction alongside his brother. The company earned its reputation the old-fashioned way: consistent quality, careful planning, and an almost stubborn refusal to compromise. If something wasn't done right, it wasn't done at all. Word spread quickly. In Massachusetts, if you wanted a job done properly, you called the Silvas. Ironically, it was that very authenticity that led Tom into television, despite having no desire to be there. When a chance encounter with producer Russ Morrish put a camera in front of him, Tom didn't suddenly become a TV personality. He stayed exactly who he was, a builder explaining his work as he did it. No theatrics, no shortcuts, just process, patience, and purpose. And that is why the rumors mattered. Because if someone like Tom Silva, who never chased fame, never played the game, and never cut corners, was reconsidering his place, then something meaningful had to be happening. At 77, as questions grew louder and speculation intensified, Tom finally chose to address what fans have been quietly asking for years. And what he revealed would reshape how many people understood not just his future, but his entire legacy. When Tom Silva first became a familiar face on this old house, viewers assumed his calm authority was simply natural talent. In reality, it was the product of decades spent mastering a trade where mistakes were costly and shortcuts unforgiving. What audiences saw on television was not a performance. It was muscle memory shaped by real job sites, real pressure, and real consequences. That authenticity became the backbone of the show's credibility, and over time, it made Tom indispensable. Yet the very qualities that made him beloved also planted the seeds of conflict. Television, after all, runs on schedules, segments, and constraints that don't always align with the slow, deliberate pace of quality construction. As the show grew in popularity through the late 1980s and early 1990s, production demands intensified. Episodes needed tighter timelines. Projects had to fit seasonal arcs. Certain processes, once allowed to unfold naturally, were now expected to bend to the clock. For Tom, this created an uncomfortable tension. Construction wasn't something you could rush without consequences. A beam didn't care about airtime. A foundation didn't respond to deadlines. When producers pushed for faster turnarounds or simplified explanations that glossed over critical steps, Tom felt something essential was at risk. This wasn't just about creative disagreement. It was about the soul of the craft. Behind the scenes, discussions grew sharper. Tom argued that viewers deserved honesty, even if that honesty meant admitting that some things take time. He believed the show had a responsibility not just to entertain, but to educate truthfully. To him, showing a process incorrectly, even for the sake of smoother storytelling, was a form of cutting corners. And cutting corners, whether on a job site or on camera, was unacceptable. Those close to the production later described these years as a quiet tug-of-war. On one side was the evolving reality of television. On the other was a craftsman who refused to compromise his principles. Tom didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply stood his ground. Either the work would be shown properly, or he would walk away. That resolve surprised many. By then, Tom was already a household name, deeply associated with the show's success. Losing him would have meant more than replacing a cast member. It would have meant losing trust. Eventually, adjustments were made. Tom was given greater input over how construction was presented, ensuring that accuracy and integrity remained non-negotiable. The show survived the moment, but the strain left its mark. Years later, the pressure returned in a different form. By the early 2000s, television itself was changing. Faster edits, broader appeal, and younger audiences became industry obsessions. Once again, Tom found himself questioning whether there was still room for his approach in a landscape increasingly driven by speed and surface-level expertise. In private conversations, he weighed the unthinkable, stepping away. This wasn't about burnout or ego. It was about identity. Tom had built his entire career on the idea that trust is earned slowly and lost quickly. If remaining on the show meant diluting that trust, even subtly, then leaving might be the only way to protect it. At one point, he even drafted a resignation letter. He discussed it with his family, measuring the cost of staying against the cost of walking away from something he had helped shape for decades. Once again, the gravity of the situation forced a reckoning. Producers recognized that Tom Silva wasn't simply another expert on screen. He was the moral center of the program. Promises were made. Greater autonomy was granted. The letter was never sent. But the fact that it existed revealed just how close the show came to losing the very person who embodied its values. For viewers, none of this drama was visible. On screen, Tom remained steady, patient, and precise. That contrast between the calm exterior and the battles fought quietly behind the scenes only deepened the mystique surrounding him. Fans sensed something was different, even if they couldn't name it. And as the years passed and Tom grew older, speculation returned with renewed intensity. Why was he still there? Why hadn't he left? Or perhaps more pressing, how long could he continue? These questions weren't born from doubt, but from respect. People weren't asking because they wanted him gone. They were asking because it was hard to imagine this old house without him. And as Tom approached his late 70s, the answers everyone was waiting for were finally beginning to take shape. By the time Tom Silva entered his 70s, the questions surrounding his future were no longer whispers. They were expectations. In an industry where visibility often fades with age, many assumed it was only a matter of time before he stepped aside. Television history is filled with respected veterans quietly phased out, replaced by younger faces and flashier edits. Yet Tom Silva never fit neatly into that pattern. He was not a personality created by television. Television had merely amplified what already existed. For years, viewers noticed subtle shifts. Tom spoke more often about teaching, about legacy, about preparing others to carry the work forward. To some, this sounded like a farewell in progress. To others, it felt like the natural evolution of a master craftsman who understood that knowledge only matters if it is passed on. Still, speculation grew. Online discussions dissected every appearance, every comment, every perceived absence. Was he preparing to retire? Had the show already begun planning for life without him? The truth, as it often is with Tom, was far more complex than a simple yes or no. Behind the scenes, the emotional weight of decades in the spotlight had begun to accumulate. Tom had spent his entire adult life balancing two demanding worlds: the unforgiving realities of construction, and the constant expectations of television production. Each season required not just physical endurance, but mental vigilance. He wasn't merely building homes. He was protecting his standard. Every decision carried the quiet pressure of knowing that millions of viewers might copy what they saw on screen. One misstep, one oversimplified explanation, could ripple far beyond the job site. That responsibility never left him. If anything, it grew heavier with time. Then came the moment that changed everything. In 2018, this old house family was shaken by the sudden death of Austin Wilson, a young apprentice who had been closely connected to the show's efforts to promote skilled trades. Austin was not just another crew member. He represented the future Tom had worked so hard to cultivate, proof that the next generation was listening, learning, and stepping forward. His passing was unexpected, and for Tom, deeply personal. Those who worked alongside him noticed an immediate shift. The steady presence that had anchored countless projects seemed quieter. Meetings grew more subdued. Conversations that once flowed easily became more reflective. For perhaps the first time, Tom confronted a reality he could not fix with skill or experience. Loss does not respond to careful planning. Grief does not follow blueprints. In private moments, Tom began questioning everything. Had he done enough? Was it time to step back, to let others take over while he preserved what remained of his own energy? After decades of building solutions, he found himself facing a problem with no clear answer. Walking away from the show suddenly felt less like defeat and more like self-preservation. Yet even in grief, the principles that defined Tom Silva refused to let go. Support came from unexpected places, including from those most affected by Austin's loss. Instead of blame or resentment, Tom encountered encouragement, reminders that his mentorship had mattered deeply, that his influence extended far beyond television episodes or completed renovations. Slowly, that perspective reshaped his thinking. Perhaps leaving was not the only way to honor the past. Perhaps staying, teaching, guiding, and protecting the integrity of the craft was just as important. As the television landscape continued to evolve through the 2010s, new pressures emerged. Streaming platforms favored faster pacing and trend-driven content. Producers across the industry leaned toward younger experts who could be packaged for digital audiences. The idea of reducing Tom's on-screen presence was floated more than once. To some, it seemed inevitable. To Tom, it felt dangerous. He saw clearly what others sometimes overlooked. The strength of this old house was not novelty. It was trust. Viewers didn't tune in for spectacle. They tuned in to understand how things truly worked. They came to learn why a structure stood, not just how it looked when finished. Diluting that depth, even gradually, risked eroding the foundation the show had spent decades building. Tom pushed back, not out of ego, but out of obligation. He reminded decision-makers that authenticity was the program's greatest asset, that audiences valued experience over trendiness, that credibility, once lost, could not be rebuilt as easily as a damaged wall. This time, he wasn't alone. Fans voiced their support. Colleagues recognized what was at stake. The message was unmistakable. Tom Silva was not just part of the show's history. He was central to its present. And so, as he approached 77, Tom made a quiet but decisive choice. He would not retire. Not yet. Not while there was still work to be done, standards to protect, and people to teach. In internal conversations, he clarified his intentions. He would remain involved as a lead contractor and technical authority, focusing on projects that allowed him to apply his experience without compromising his well-being. The pace might adjust, but the purpose would not. This decision was not about defying age. It was about redefining relevance. Tom understood that stepping back did not have to mean disappearing. It could mean mentoring more intentionally, guiding rather than carrying, shaping outcomes instead of controlling every detail. In doing so, he preserved both his health and the heart of the show. For fans, the confirmation brought relief. The rumors had finally met reality, not through a dramatic announcement, but through consistency. Tom Silva stayed because he still believed in what he was doing, because integrity, to him, was not a phase of life, but a lifelong commitment. And because walking away would have meant abandoning the very values he had spent decades defending. In the end, Tom's story was never about resisting change. It was about choosing the right kind of change, the kind that honors the past while preparing for the future, the kind that builds something lasting, not just in wood and stone, but in people. And as long as there were lessons left to teach, Tom Silva made it clear he wasn't finished yet. As the rumors slowly settled and the speculation lost its edge, Tom Silva turned his focus to something that had quietly become the most important chapter of his career, ensuring that what he had built would outlast him. Not the homes, those would stand on their own, but the people, the mindset, the standard. In many ways, this phase of Tom's life revealed more about who he truly was than any renovation ever televised. For years, viewers had admired his technical mastery. What they saw less often was the way he invested in others when the cameras weren't rolling. Tom never believed craftsmanship was a solo pursuit. To him, it was a relay. Someone hands you the knowledge, you carry it forward, and eventually you pass it on. Failing to do that wasn't just unfortunate, it was irresponsible. That belief shaped how he approached mentorship on and off the set of this old house. Younger tradespeople didn't just learn what to do under Tom's guidance. They learned why it mattered. He challenged them to think beyond the immediate task, to imagine how their decisions would age over time. Would the solution still make sense in 10 years? Would it still hold up when no one remembered who built it? One of the most visible examples of this commitment was his relationship with his nephew, Charlie Silva. Rather than treating family as a shortcut to leadership, Tom took the opposite approach. Charlie was expected to earn his place, to absorb the same lessons, face the same scrutiny, and carry the same responsibility as anyone else. Tom's mentorship was not gentle, but it was fair. And over time, Charlie grew into a leader capable of carrying Silva Brothers construction forward without compromising its values. What mattered most to Tom was not control, but continuity. He understood that clinging too tightly to the reins could weaken the very future he wanted to protect. Letting go, strategically and thoughtfully, became part of his craft. That meant allowing others to step into the spotlight, make decisions, and even make mistakes. Growth, after all, rarely happens without friction. This philosophy extended beyond family. Over the years, Tom became a central figure in encouraging collaboration across trades. Painters, electricians, landscapers, and finish specialists weren't treated as supporting characters. They were partners. Tom made a point of highlighting their expertise, reinforcing the idea that a well-built home is the result of many skilled hands working in harmony. In doing so, he quietly challenged a culture that often undervalues trade work and isolates specialties instead of celebrating them. That same concern drove his involvement in vocational education. As conversations across the country began focusing on labor shortages and the declining interest in skilled trades, Tom saw more than a workforce issue. He saw a cultural one. Too many young people were being told that success only came through college degrees and office jobs, while meaningful, hands-on careers were dismissed as second best. Tom knew better. He had lived the alternative. Through initiatives like Generation Next, he worked to reframe the narrative. The trades, he argued, were not a fallback. They were calling. They offered stability, pride, creativity, and tangible results. There was power in building something real, something you could point to and say, I made that. Tom didn't just advocate from a distance. He showed up at panels, advisory boards, and workshops, speaking plainly about the rewards and responsibilities of the work. Even at 77, his schedule remained full. But it was structured differently now. Tom no longer felt the need to be everywhere at once. Instead, he chose projects that aligned with his strengths and values. He focused on oversight, problem-solving, and mentoring, trusting others to handle execution under his guidance. This shift wasn't about slowing down. It was about working smarter and with purpose. What impressed colleagues most was how deliberately Tom balanced tradition with progress. He was never hostile to innovation. He simply refused to adopt change for its own sake. New tools, materials, and technologies were welcome, but only if they genuinely improved outcomes. Flashy solutions that sacrificed durability or understanding were dismissed without hesitation. To Tom, progress was meaningful only when it respected the lessons of the past. This mindset resonated deeply with longtime viewers. In an era obsessed with speed and shortcuts, Tom's measured approach felt almost radical. He reminded people that good work takes time, that patience is a skill, and that pride in craftsmanship is not outdated. It's rare. Each time he explained a process carefully or insisted on doing something the hard way, because it was the right way, he reinforced a message that extended far beyond construction. And that is where the rumors ultimately lost their power. Yes, Tom Silva acknowledged the challenges. Yes, he admitted there were moments when walking away felt tempting. But what he ultimately confirmed was far more meaningful than retirement plans or behind-the-scenes tension. He confirmed his commitment to the craft, to the people who depended on his guidance, and to the idea that integrity is not negotiable, no matter the medium. His decision to stay was not rooted in fear of letting go. It was rooted in responsibility. Tom understood that legacy is not something you declare. It's something others carry forward when you're no longer there. By choosing to remain engaged, on his terms, he ensured that what this old house represented would not quietly erode under the pressure of trends or convenience. In the end, Tom Silva's story is not about defying age or resisting change. It is about stewardship, about recognizing when to lead from the front and when to guide from behind, about knowing that the most important structures you build are not always the ones with foundations and frames, but the ones made of trust, knowledge, and example. And as this chapter of his life continues to unfold, one truth has become undeniable. Tom Silva did not simply build houses for television. He built a standard, one that continues to shape the craft long after the cameras stop rolling. As the conversation around legacy deepened, Tom Silva found himself confronting a question that every master eventually faces: what happens when the work no longer depends entirely on your hands? For Tom, this was not an abstract idea. It was unfolding in real time. Years of mentoring, teaching, and insisting on high standards were beginning to show results. Not in accolades or ratings, but in people who no longer needed him standing beside them to do the job right. This transition was neither sudden nor accidental. Tom had always believed that a true craftsman measures success not by personal output, but by how well others perform when you step back. That belief shaped the way he approached his later years on this old house. He didn't cling to control. Instead, he focused on clarity, making sure the principles were understood so thoroughly that they could stand on their own. On set, this meant giving younger experts more room to lead discussions, explain systems, and make decisions, while he observed closely from the margins. When mistakes happened, Tom didn't rush in to correct them publicly. He waited. He asked questions. He guided people to recognize the flaw themselves. To outsiders, it might have looked like restraint. In reality, it was discipline. Teaching someone to think is far more difficult than teaching them to follow instructions. This shift subtly changed the tone of the show. Viewers still saw Tom's familiar presence, but now they also witnessed the confidence of those he had shaped. The knowledge no longer flowed in a single direction. It moved through a network of professionals who shared a common language of precision, respect, and accountability. In many ways, this was Tom's quiet proof that his approach worked. Away from the cameras, the same philosophy guided his involvement in the industry. Tom became increasingly vocal about the long-term consequences of ignoring skilled trades. He warned that the shortage of qualified workers was not just an economic issue, but a structural one. Homes, infrastructure, and communities all depended on people who understood how things were built and why. Losing that knowledge, he argued, meant losing resilience. Rather than framing the trades as a solution to a crisis, Tom framed them as an opportunity. He spoke about dignity in work, about the satisfaction of solving real problems with tangible results. He challenged parents, educators, and policymakers to reconsider how success was defined. Not everyone needed to follow the same path, he insisted, but everyone deserved to know that working with your hands and your mind together was not a lesser choice. These conversations resonated because they were grounded in experience. Tom never romanticized the work. He spoke honestly about its demands, the physical strain, the responsibility, the mistakes that could not be undone. But he also spoke about its rewards, independence, pride, and the rare privilege of leaving something behind that others could rely on. In a world increasingly dominated by digital outcomes and fleeting metrics, his message felt refreshingly solid. As time went on, Tom also became more intentional about balance. Staying involved did not mean sacrificing health or family. He adjusted his role, choosing moments where his input mattered most. Complex structural challenges, critical decision points, situations where experience could prevent costly errors. He trusted his team with execution, stepping in only when necessary. This was not disengagement, it was optimization. What surprised many observers was how energized he seemed. Free from a need to prove himself, Tom appeared lighter, more reflective, and more generous with his time. Conversations drifted beyond technique into philosophy. Why do we build? Who are we building for? What responsibility do we carry when our work outlasts us? These were not questions with easy answers, but Tom welcomed them. They reminded him that craftsmanship, at its core, is about stewardship. Of course, the rumors never fully disappeared. They resurfaced whenever Tom missed an episode or spoke about the future. But by now, their tone had changed. They were no longer rooted in anxiety, but in curiosity. People weren't afraid of losing Tom Silva. They were trying to understand how someone like him decides when a chapter is truly finished. His response, whether spoken directly or demonstrated through action, remained consistent. He wasn't counting years. He was counting purpose. As long as he could contribute meaningfully by teaching, guiding, and protecting the integrity of the work, he saw no reason to walk away. Retirement, in the traditional sense, held little appeal. What mattered was relevance, and relevance, Tom believed, came from usefulness. In this phase of his life, usefulness meant helping others avoid the mistakes he had already made. It meant reinforcing standards before they eroded. It meant reminding both viewers and professionals that quality is not an aesthetic, it's a process. And perhaps most importantly, it meant showing that leadership does not always look like command. Sometimes it looks like trust. Looking ahead, Tom understood that the day would come when he would no longer be present in the same way. He didn't resist that reality. He prepared for it by investing so deeply in people rather than positioning himself as irreplaceable. He ensured that his absence would not create a vacuum. The work would continue. The standards would endure. The lessons would echo. That, ultimately, is the confirmation hidden beneath all the rumors. Not a dramatic announcement, not a farewell tour, but a quiet assurance that Tom Silva's influence was never meant to be confined to a single role or a single era. He built something far more durable than a television legacy. He built a culture of care, precision, and responsibility. And as long as that culture continues, on job sites, in workshops, and in the minds of those who learn by watching him, Tom Silva's work is not finished. It has simply evolved into its most enduring form. As Tom Silva moved deeper into his late 70s, something subtle but powerful became increasingly clear. His influence was no longer defined by how often he appeared on camera, but by how deeply his values had taken root. The frantic speculation that once surrounded his future began to give way to a quieter understanding. Tom was no longer simply maintaining a role. He was shaping an ethos that would persist long after his presence inevitably changed. This shift was especially evident in how audiences engaged with this old house. Viewers no longer watched solely for instructions. They watched for perspective, for reassurance that careful work still mattered in a culture increasingly obsessed with speed. Tom's measured explanations, his insistence on understanding before action, offered something rare: permission to slow down and do things right. Behind the scenes, his role continued to evolve. Rather than driving every decision, Tom focused on defining boundaries, clear standards that others could operate within confidently. He reviewed plans, asked the hard questions, and stepped in when judgment mattered more than muscle. In doing so, he modeled a form of leadership that is often overlooked: leadership that trusts preparation over presence. This approach paid dividends. Teams functioned with greater autonomy, yet fewer errors. Younger professionals began to internalize the logic behind decisions instead of memorizing outcomes. The work became more resilient because it was rooted in understanding, not dependence. Tom had always believed that the goal of teaching was independence. Now, he was watching that belief become reality. Emotionally, this period also marked a kind of closure. The grief that once threatened to pull him away from the work softened into resolve. Loss had clarified what mattered. It reminded Tom that time is finite and that the most meaningful contributions are not the loudest ones, but the most lasting. Rather than retreat, he chose to invest his remaining energy with precision. That clarity extended to how he spoke publicly. When asked about retirement, Tom didn't frame the answer around age or exhaustion. He framed it around responsibility. As long as people were learning from the work, as long as accuracy and honesty still needed defending, he felt an obligation to remain engaged. Not indefinitely, but intentionally. This mindset resonated far beyond television. In industry circles, Tom became a reference point for what longevity could look like when it was guided by purpose instead of fear. He showed that staying relevant didn't require reinvention. It required consistency. In a landscape where trends cycle quickly and expertise is often diluted, his steadiness stood out. Perhaps most importantly, Tom's continued presence served as a counter-narrative to the idea that experience loses value over time. He demonstrated that wisdom compounds, that judgment improves, that patience becomes an asset, not a liability. Younger colleagues didn't see him as an obstacle to advancement. They saw him as a safeguard, a final check against error, a reminder of why standards exist. As the seasons moved forward, the rumors that once dominated conversation lost their urgency. The truth had emerged not through declarations, but through action. Tom Silva stayed, not because he had to, but because he still had something essential to give. And in choosing how to stay, he ensured that his contribution would be sustainable, meaningful, and true to everything he had stood for. In the end, Part 6 of Tom's story is not about continuation for its own sake. It is about intention, about recognizing when presence matters and when guidance is enough, about understanding that legacy is not preserved by clinging to the spotlight, but by preparing others to stand confidently within it. Tom Silva did not silence the rumors by denying them. He answered them by example, by showing that commitment can evolve without weakening, that leadership can soften without fading, and that the most enduring work is often done quietly, long after the applause has moved on. In the end, the story of Tom Silva was never really about rumors, retirement, or even television. Those were just surface ripples on something much deeper. At its core, Tom's journey has always been about what it means to do honest work in a world that increasingly rewards speed over substance. And that is why his presence still matters. For decades, this old house has stood apart from most home improvement programming. It didn't rely on spectacle or shortcuts. It relied on trust. Tom Silva became the embodiment of that trust, not because he sought it, but because he earned it repeatedly, project after project, explanation after explanation. Viewers believed him because he never pretended the work was easy, fast, or foolproof. He respected their intelligence enough to show the truth. As the years passed, Tom quietly demonstrated something even more powerful than technical skill: character. He showed that integrity is not a one-time decision, but a habit reinforced daily. When pressure mounted, he didn't adapt by lowering standards. He adapted by clarifying them. When grief struck, he didn't retreat permanently. He reflected, recalibrated, and returned with renewed purpose. When age became a talking point, he didn't fight it. He redefined what contribution could look like. What Tom ultimately confirmed, without dramatic announcements or stage farewells, is that legacy is built through consistency, through showing up, through caring enough to argue for what's right even when it's inconvenient, through preparing others so thoroughly that your absence will not undo your work. In that sense, Tom Silva has already succeeded far beyond any single role or title. His continued involvement is not about clinging to relevance. It is about stewardship, about making sure that the values he spent a lifetime defending, precision, patience, responsibility, remain intact as the world around them changes. He understands that eventually every builder steps back, but he also understands that stepping back does not have to mean letting go of purpose. For the audience, that realization is quietly reassuring. It reminds us that mastery does not expire on a schedule. That experience, when paired with humility, becomes wisdom, and that there is dignity in evolving rather than disappearing. Tom Silva's story offers a rare kind of closure, not an ending, but a settling, a sense that things are where they should be. So when viewers see him now, measuring carefully, explaining calmly, guiding rather than commanding, they are witnessing the culmination of a life spent doing things the right way. Not loudly, not dramatically, but faithfully. And perhaps that is the most powerful confirmation of all. Tom Silva did not build his legacy by announcing it. He built it the same way he built everything else. One decision at a time, with care, intention, and an unwavering respect for the work. And as long as those values endure, his story will continue, quietly shaping generations yet to come.